greetings to everyone, wherever you are coming from the United States, the UK, the beautiful, beautiful continent of Africa that we call home. And we are here to present the 2021 Distinguished Africanist Award. And this award recognizes a lifetime of achievement and distinguished contribution to African studies. It is truly a landmark accomplishment for those in our field. This year, the committee comprised the following: myself as chair, Caroline Brown, Rutgers University, our outgoing president, Husseina Alidu, also from Rutgers, our incoming president, Wendy Belcher at Princeton University, and Rebecca Shumway, the College of Charleston. The committee unanimously and vigorously decided to award the prize to Professor, the one and only Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí, Professor of Sociology and Africana and Gender Studies at Stony Brook University. If if it wasn't for Zoom, the crisis of Zoom, and we had to do this properly, we would have had to organize drummers and Oriki praise singers and people ululating and all the good stuff. But in spite of the fact that we are not able to do that, we are going to call Husseina Alidu, the incoming ASA president, to sing her praise names for Oyèrónkẹ. So Husseina, over to you.
Wow, thank you.
My senior brother and colleague, Professor Ato Kweston, I'm grateful to you and thank you for introducing us to this wonderful moment to celebrate a great colleague and sister, Professor Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí, and to congratulate her for being the awardee for the 2021 ASA Distinguished Africanist Scholar Award. Congratulations, Professor Oyèwùmí.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adupe o.
Adupe mungode.
Mungode. So I'm going to just be very humble in expressing and trying to summarize here and there some of the comments of nominees, and including my own. At this moment, I will let you know that. So Professor Oyèwùmí's award-winning book, The Invention of Women, Making Sense of Western Gender Discourse, still stands as one of the most influential theoretical African and feminist books written in the 20th century by an African Black woman scholar who has generated productive rethinking of the ways in which Euro-Western colonial education and modes of sociological inquiry have perpetuated a monolithic understanding of sex, sexuality, gender construction in colonized African societies. This colonial gender construction is achieved through Euro-colonial patriarchal prism and its fixation on biological binary sex determinism, dominant male over oppressed women. Furthermore, driving into her own Yoruba culture, Oyèwùmí used Yoruba hermeneutic epistemology to demonstrate how Yoruba gender ideology and construction before Euro-colonial encounter was built on social historical realities such as age, seniority, and other social categories that have nothing to do with sex, gender, biological determinism embedded in Eurocentric conception of gender. This Yoruba hermeneutic epistemology and ontology is necessary in understanding the social historical conditions that produce the vocabulary and grammar of gender in Yoruba and or in other African cultures. Thus, Oyèwùmí's philosophizing and sociology of gender forced the inquirer, the scientific inquirer, to proceed by exploring first what were the pre-existing gender world senses before Euro-Western colonial encounters and their logic of creating and naming new gender realities in Africa. Research methodology and theoretical replicability are the positive outcome of the influence of Oyèwùmí Oyèrónkẹ's groundbreaking works on post-colonial theories, decolonial feminism beyond Africa. Her outstanding influence in the reshaping of new sociology of and philosophy of sex and gender and feminism are exemplified by the impressive list of studies across the fields of social sciences, the humanities, and all areas, whether it is African studies, European studies, Asian studies, Latin American studies, that cites Oyèwùmí's works as inspirational and create the ground for the emergence of their own powerful feminist theories. This scholarly distinction accounts for Oyèrónkẹ's appearance in many citations. You just have to go and do the H index in research. For example, the replicability Oyèwùmí Oyèrónkẹ's theoretical arguments on gender and associated linguistic imperialism have inspired the works of many decolonial African Black feminists, works such as Tiffany Willoughby Herart and Azel Coetzee with regard to the situation in South Africa and in the US, respectively, as well as post-colonial and decolonial feminist thinkers from Latin America, such as Maria Laguno's influential work, who coined the concept of, quote, coloniality of gender, and Rolanda Vasquez, who are in agreement with Oyèwùmí on how Euro-colonial capitalism has invented gender and sexuality that served its patriarchal colonial economic project, and in the process has imposed a colonized logic of thinking and modes of producing language about sex, gender, and sexualities that dismiss African and other world epistemologies of gender and vocabularies. Rolanda Vasquez called on the urgency to explore the place of language in decolonial feminist translation and theorization about gender by building her own work and drawing from Oyèwùmí Oyèrónkẹ's groundbreaking works. By a tour de force, Oyèwùmí Oyèrónkẹ has respectably moved to the center African feminist thinking built on African epistemologies on gender and sexuality as articulated in African languages were hitherto located at the margin, if not dismissed completely, not only within Western academy, but also in continental African scholarship. In her own research, she demonstrated how such earlier scholarship that did not interrogate the weight of colonialism on post-colonial African modes of thinking and knowledge production. In illustrating the impact of colonialism in African thinking on gender, sexuality, and language production, we often teach, personally, I teach one of Oyèwùmí's insightful, groundbreaking, persuasive articles in which she demonstrates the gendered ideological bias in the writing of Oyo Yoruba history. In her article entitled Making History, Creating Gender, Some Methodological and Interpretative Question in the Writing of Oyo Traditions, which appeared in History in Africa in 1998, Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí convincingly exhibit the ways in which Euro-colonial thinking has influenced even authoritative Yoruba historians, such as Reverend Samuel Johnson, whose historiography has erased dynastic Yoruba women in his writing of Oyo Yoruba writing history. She argues that henceforth, many scholarly studies repeat the same patriarchal bias by dismissing pre-colonial and gendered Yoruba ways of making sense, although many critics have opposed Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí's works as born out of Yoruba elitists, I personally see her body of works as important intervention, and I'm not the only one, in displacing hegemonic Eurocentric monothinking and methodologies, while also asking for the consideration of ways of seeing the world and the centering and recentering of African and African women, African epistemologies and African women's scientific contribution and language in interpreting African realities, be it related to gender, sexualities, and or other critical thematic concepts. Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí's What Gender is Motherhood? Changing Yoruba Ideals of Power, Procreation, and Identity in the Age of Modernity, published 2015, is yet another cutting-edge studies of how colonialism has altered the non-gendered hierarchical mode of family and kinship social organizations of Yoruba society by imposing patriarchal normativity that produce male dominance in many spheres of human endeavors, against which Yoruba women have to reckon with, yet again dismissing Yoruba age seniority, which is critical in making sense of Yoruba kinship system and modes of social relations. Regardless of whether one agrees with Professor Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí's analysis or not, her works have impacted scholars across many fields in the Africans and non-African humanities, social sciences, in sociology, political thought, philosophy, literary, translation studies, feminist political science, and are cited in outstanding books and peer-reviewed journals such as Science, Gender and Women's Studies, Feminist Theories, Queer and Transgender Studies, Post-Colonial Theories, and Decolonial Studies journals. In African studies, Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí is a thinker, scientist, whose groundbreaking works have achieved, in my humble opinion, the same prominence as the scholarship of Valentin Mudembe, Paul Hutenji, and many others, and has transformed feminist scholarship by calling for the equal centering and recentering of African gender hermeneutics epistemologies and African languages and mode of thinking. Her works have highlighted above, have impacted on many African and non-African feminist thinkers, both senior and emerging scholars. Her works are cited where other luminaries are cited, like Fatima Mernissi, like Chandra Mohanty, Gayatri Spivak, Judith Butler, Simone de Beauvoir, to cite a few. Furthermore, through her teaching, her mentoring of younger scholars, and her endeavors through the production of several edited collective works, Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí has demonstrated her commitment to strengthen African feminist studies, not only in the US, but in Africa, the diaspora, and beyond. In addition, she has contributed on the basis of her own conviction of the politics of African Black mothering to mentor other emerging scholars and made significant effort in facilitating workshops that bring other African, Black, and non-African scholars, both senior and juniors, in conversation with her own works, which have resulted in insightful edited volumes, which we use in our own classes and research, such as African Women and Feminism, reflecting on the politics of sisterhood, edited with Africa World Press, Gendering Epistemologies in Africa, Gendering Traditions, Space, Social Institutions, and Identities, published in 2010. Other doctoral students who have been part of the nominees are in awe and great respect with Professor Oyèrónkẹ's influential works, which I highlighted earlier, and appropriately reference her in their works and also their teaching, including myself. So in light of all the above, we want to say, Ashe o sister scientist, we thank you for your generosity, your intellectual generosity, your scientificity, Your work is read not only in the US, in Africa. Your work has gone to Latin America, to Asia, to Europe, every world and every generation. We thank you, sister. Thank you.
Oyèwùmí, please.
Mo fire fún Ọ̀ṣun, mo fire fún Ọya, mo fọ ire fún gbogbo àwọn Ọ̀yá. Àfìmọ̀ fóbìnrin, iye wa tá a pè ní mọ̀. Àfìmọ̀ jẹ́ tọ̀ṣun o, iye wa tá a pè ní mọ̀. Ǹjẹ́ ẹ jẹ́ ká wólẹ̀ fóbìnrin, obìnrin ló bí wa. Káwa tó dé ènìyàn. Ẹ jẹ́ ká wólẹ̀ fóbìnrin, obìnrin ló bọ́ba. Kọ́ba tó dòrìṣà. Ore yèyé o. I welcome you to this assembly as I'm just paying homage to Orisha Osun, the creator and mother deity of knowledge and creation. Greetings from New York to you all, wherever you are on the planet. My name is Oyèrónkẹ Oyěwùmí. I am the recipient of the 2021 Distinguished Africanist Award of the African Studies Association. I dedicate this award in the memory of my late mother, Igbayilola. Her name, Igbayilola, translates as "this is the time of honor." I embrace such sentiments, especially today. The Distinguished Africanist Award was established in 1984. In the 38 years since this award has been conferred, over 50% have been given to white men, 10 to African men, 6 to white women, 2 to African American men, 1 to an African American woman. No African woman has ever been recognized with this award. Thus, I am the first African woman to win this prestigious African Studies Prize. I received the news that I won the African Studies Association's Distinguished Africanist Award on September 14, 2021. I am humbled by its immense significance on discovering myself suddenly in the company of earlier winners such as Akimabo Ogunje, Ali Mazrui, Sarah Berry, Pearl Robinson, and Edmund Keller. This made me realize the impressive club into which I have been admitted, and how fortunate that my work has been recognized as being as noteworthy as theirs. It is clear that in each generation, very few will receive the honor. The focus of my research is on gender, hierarchy, and the construction of knowledge. My work exposes gender as a colonial category, calling into question the Eurocentric idea that gender categories are natural, universal, and inherent in the way in which human communities organize and thought about themselves. At the center of my oeuvre is the book, The Invention of Women, Making an African Sense of Western Gender Discourses. An extended sociological disquisition on gender, Invention argues that the narrative of gendered corporeality that dominates Western interpretation of the social world is a cultural discourse and cannot be taken for granted in other cultural milieux. The book offers a comparative historical account of the construction of social categories, both in Western culture and Yoruba society of Southwestern Nigeria. Drawing from family organization, language, division of labor, religion, and oral traditions, I show that gender was not originally part of the Yoruba conceptual framework. The finding that historically there were no gendered names, no gendered pronouns, no gender-specific kinship categories, or gender-exclusive institutions in Yoruba communities brought to light the existence of a different epistemology. My research caused a paradigm shift in the academic study of gender. I was born in Jos, Nigeria, into a huge Yoruba family. I have 26 siblings and I am number 8. That's how I usually introduce myself to students. I would be remiss if I did not say that growing up as a Yoruba in an admittedly privileged, though immigrant setting in Jos, far away from the legendary Yoruba towns, primed me for my career in academia. Spending my early years in a space that was not Yoruba dominant attuned me to the fact that there are different ways of being, and ingrained in me a profound understanding of the Yoruba saying, "Onokun Owoja," there's not one road to the market. My early childhood experience in a cosmopolitan city like Jos taught me the importance of appreciating diversity of all kinds, most significantly in religion, culture, ethnicity, and language. I developed in my very early years a deep awareness of the various languages and cultures that surrounded me. And this openness to other ways of being was later to become quite beneficial in my scholarship. I attended the University of Ibadan, the premier Nigerian university, great UIs, for my undergraduate degree, and benefited from the scholarship and mentorship of the late Professor Peter Eke, who was my teacher. When I was preparing to apply to graduate school in the United States, he gave valuable advice and shared with me his own experience of doing a PhD in sociology at UC Berkeley. As it turned out, I followed his footsteps to his old department. His path-breaking research on the state and the two publics influenced my research, particularly as I was thinking of how gender is implicated in the operation of publics in the post-colonial state. Today, in appreciation, I invoke Professor Peter Eke's spirit. My relationship with the ASA started in 1984 when I attended my first annual meeting in Los Angeles. I was beginning my second year in graduate school, having enrolled in the sociology department in the fall of 1983. There was a small Center for African Studies which provided a focus for African Studies Berkeley community, but there was not much of a campus African Studies curriculum. At this moment, let me do a shout out to my friend and colleague, who is the associate director, the current associate director of the Berkeley African Studies Center, who at this conference is receiving the 2021 Outstanding Service Achievement Award of the organization. Hello, Martha Saavedra, congratulations. Over the years, attending ASA annual meetings became such a necessity for me just to see Africans and people similarly situated congregate. Attending the ASA conference even got better as the numbers of African women increased and transformed, if you would agree with me, the sartorial character of the organization. Every year, I look forward to the sorority of what I call the Gele Squad. They know themselves. My peeps, I am appreciating you all. The idea of area studies was new to me. There was no such thing on offer at the University of Ibadan. It took years for me to start to make sense of these American hierarchies of knowledge. I was in for a rude shock. A few months into my studies on the storied Berkeley campus, I noticed that I was being asked one recurring question. Why sociology? Why are you enrolled in a sociology department? I would patiently explain my interests and future research plans in Nigeria. Often I was told that I should actually be enrolled in anthropology. I never quite understood the question until a few years later. When I asked why I must do anthropology, several of my peers informed me that sociology studied their own society, but anthropology studied other societies with a capital O. I said, voila, that is why I am a sociologist. I am African studying African societies, but what they were alluding to is the deeply ingrained racial and racist idea that sociology was founded to study modern societies, and Africa was not a part of the modern. Africa was primitive. From this perspective then, my presence in one of the top sociology departments in the USA was an anomaly, to say the least. This had implications for my job prospects, most especially after I got my PhD. I was getting schooled in institutionalized racism in the organization of the disciplines and in knowledge production, but did not even know it. But the transdiscipline that made a deep impression on me and impact in my early career as a student and subsequently was not anthropology, but Black studies or African American studies. I discovered race as a social category and as an important part of my very own identity. Despite the fact that I had enrolled in a sociology of race and ethnic relations course taught by one of the top scholars, it was my involvement with the emerging interdiscipline of Black studies that taught me a lot about American society and provided me with even practical knowledge that I needed in order to survive graduate school and indeed navigate life in God's own racist country. Fortuitously, the late Professor Barbara Christian, the pioneering top scholar of African American literature and Black feminism in the world, hired me as her teaching assistant. Today, I invoke Barbara Christian's spirit. An amazing mentor. In her classes, I got more than an education on race. I learned much about academic discourse on feminism and gender, amongst other things. Intersectionality and critical race theory were already baked into Barbara Christian's syllabus. The insights I garnered on race and gender, most especially, made me understand my supposed place in the academy. It supplied me with linguistic resources and tools with which to understand some of the puzzling things I was experiencing. Intellectually, a deeper understanding of the racialization of knowledge, the racism and sexism that emanated from it, opened up unimaginable vistas that led to productive thinking. This understanding showed up in my writings, and in fact, the first chapter of my dissertation was titled White Woman's Burden, African Women in Western Feminist Discourse, a piece in which I was able to bring together my ruminations on European colonization of Africa and racial hierarchy in US institutions of higher education. In this vein, I acknowledge another mentor, Philomena Steady, Professor Emerita of Africana Studies at Wellesley College, a prolific author. She documented brilliantly many aspects of African women's lives at home and in the diaspora, and taught us all how to do meaningful work. I remember the first time I read her classic paper, Research Methodology from an African Perspective. I must recognize my mentor and counselor, Chikwenye Okonjo Ogunyemi, Professor Emerita of Global Studies at Sarah Lawrence. Her original concept, womanism, inserted a necessary African voice early in the discourse and provided a fruitful counterpoint to imperial feminism. An amazing counselor, an encyclopedia of knowledge. She dispenses great advice on everything, at least everything that I need. With the publication of my book, The Invention of Women in 1997 and its expanding readership, I experienced a qualitative change in my interactions at the ASA annual meetings. Colleagues would accost me, expressing their appreciation for the book, telling me how it opened up all sorts of productive questions in their work and how it positively impacted their prospects for tenure. On more than 2 occasions, having just been introduced to an African colleague, I was getting ready for a hug, but found myself unexpectedly lifted off my feet with these colleagues exuberantly chanting praises in true Oriki mode. And these encounters, by the way, were not gender exclusive. After witnessing a few of these effusive engagements, a friend remarked, Riley, and I quote, Ronke goes to the ASA conference to meet her public. I am grateful for the many colleagues who engaged with my work and exposed my writing to their students. I sometimes say the book invention wrote me. Here, I must mention my former classmate at the University of Ibadan, colleague, mentor, and friend, Jimmy Adeshina, professor at University of South Africa, formerly at Rhodes University, who introduced and propagated my writings to colleagues and to a generation of students in South Africa. One of the joys of my sabbatical year in Pretoria was to discover that I had a following of young people, thanks to Jimmy, because I would run into people and they would talk to me and say, oh, you were Jimmy's student at Rhodes. And they would break out in a smile. I have edited 3 books. A 4th one is on the way. These books represent collaborations with many colleagues. I admire their work and wish to acknowledge their contributions to African studies and their support for my own work. I cannot overstate the importance of community in enabling one's success. Over the years, I have received many accolades and appreciation from students. I cannot state the impact of my work better than 2 graduate students of African history who took the time to inform me about the effect of my work on their own academic growth. Interestingly, although these comments are 17 years apart, they were from 2 graduate students, and both of them were from Yale, and they did not know each other. First, there was Henry Trotter, a white American male student who wrote me a letter in 2004. This was 7 years after the publication of Invention. The missive was hard copy, snail mail, and postmarked to my departmental address. This was at a time when email was not yet the currency for reaching people. I was impressed that Henry Trotter, this young man, took his time, drafted the letter in which he declared, and I quote, "What was so great about reading the book is that I asked myself many new questions about the experiences I have had in Africa, the histories I have read, and future research projects I will engage in. You have spurred me to rethink all my primary assumptions. Thus, you have re-enlivened my sense of the world and its possibilities. Is there anything greater that an educator can do for a student?" He continues, "Lastly, your point that we Western academics need to step back and rethink our foundational commitment is well taken." End of quote. The second student. After the Distinguished Africanist Award was announced in September, another Yale student, this time an African woman, Marius Kotor, wrote, and I quote, "Like so many African scholars, I have been fundamentally transformed by Professor Oyèwùmí's scholarship. The Invention of Women, What Gender is Motherhood, Gender Epistemologies, amongst many others, are texts that have given so many of us the language and tools to make sense of the ways we are positioned and the confidence to reclaim our epistemologies. On this momentous occasion, as I rejoice at this wonderful recognition, I cannot minimize the challenges we as African and Black people face operating in societies and institutions, nay, in the global world, that are systematically racist and sexist, including, of course, on our continent. I am excited by the numbers and quality of young people coming into the academy, many of whom display an impressive clarity of vision about how to move forward and claim the future. These young scholars, our future distinguished scholars, inspire me with confidence about the future and the sort of scholarship that centers Africa, which is being recognized by the awards I am so honored to have received. I am concluding, okay? Gender issues have moved to the very forefront of life and politics in the USA, and indeed around the world. But let me, for 1 minute, concentrate on the USA. What with the emergence of LGBTQ+ movements, and the fight for social justice? What with individuals trying to choose their own pronouns, meaning they're literally trying to individually invent language, okay? They've been pushed to that. The fight over who should have access to what bathroom, questions of which category do trans people belong. All these things show that gender is at the forefront of everyday life, politics, and everything else. On October 27, 2021, and I quote, the United States issued its first US passport with an X gender marker, acknowledging the rights of people who do not identify as male or female, end of quote. All this is evidence that the Western gender paradigm has failed and failed woefully. The Eurocentric model of rigidly defined, biologically determined gender binaries universalized through imperialism has failed. But you wouldn't know that in Africa because we are following them. But not before this biologic has contributed to the creation of all sorts of pathologies. Need I mention masculinist monsters? The violence against women, trans people, trans women is at an all-time high. Not to talk of the intersectional trauma that terrifies the lives of millions. In contrast, what my research has shown is that African social categories in many societies were historically fluid, non-binary, non-biologically determined. You don't have to choose your pronoun if you spoke Yoruba and a host of other African languages. And all these non-binary, non-biological fluid categories in Africa are nested in social, they were, because I'm acknowledging colonial transformations, okay? They were nested in social institutions that were non-gendered or gender exclusive and focused on generational reproduction. The African cosmic family is a paradigmatic example of the fluidity and borderlessness of social institutions. I'm sure many of you have heard this definition of the family, the cosmic family. The African family is understood to be a vast institution consisting of many who have passed on, a few who are living, and countless members who are yet unborn. Imagine if we were guided by such a vision. Would we be so cavalier and destructive of Mother Earth that sustains us? It is time to center Africa, as the theme of the conference insists. Africa is a treasure trove, not only of Benin bronzes, coltan from the DRC, and diamonds from Botswana. The real unmined gem are African concepts, ideas, values, ways of being, systems of knowledge, and episteme. Let us stop burying Ubuntu, the mother of humanity. If anything, the lesson of the gender discourse is that we must look to Africa. Thank you.